Welcome to the Pat White Show. Let's get into it.
This is Sparta!
Well, last night was a big event. Apparently everybody in the nation has been waiting for the debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And frankly, I had some thoughts on the debate. And some of them aren't particularly good, but let me tell you what I think. One of the things that caught me earliest in the debate when Kamala Harris was asked, is America better off today than they were 4 years ago? That was the question. She totally skirted the answer. Right? Frankly, didn't answer it. Went into something else. I don't know what the heck she was talking about. Because it struck me that last night's debate was, well, let's consider it this way. Do you remember an old song by Randy Travis? That's what I had to think about. Randy Travis. Song was called Digging Up Bones. Digging Up Bones about things long ago. That is exactly what the debate was to me last night. It wasn't talking about the policy, what are you going to do in the future, what are you going to change, what are you going to alter, what are you going to do. It was all about old stuff in the past. I mean, going clear back to Charlottesville? Come on. That has been totally debunked. And January 6th and everything else, nothing about the policy and what's going on in the future. Now, the reason I say that is because I was totally ashamed of David Muir as the moderator. This was probably the worst moderation thing I have ever seen anybody do by someone who I thought was a qualified journalist. Last night was not journalism, folks. It was pure, unadulterated political partyism. This was a 3-on-1 last night. The two moderator hosts, heck, even CNN did a better job back when Biden was on with Trump. This was shameful. This was downright shameful. 3-on-1. I've never seen anything like it. And hopefully the backlash will be bad enough. But remember, ABC is owned by Disney. And Disney has a particular political bent. What we are seeing is political use in a debate. Not honest. 3-on-1, what I saw. And here's the last thing I want to talk about. There has been a story going around that the earrings that Ms. Harris was wearing look like Nova H1s. Now, in case you don't know what Nova H1s are, they were introduced at the Consumer Electronics Show back in 2023. They look like earrings, but they're actually transmitters and can be put, they look just like earrings, but they're an earpiece also. Now, am I saying that she was wearing an earpiece? No, I'm not, because I don't know. But does the Nova One exist? Yes. Is it available in the U.S.? I don't think so, but it doesn't matter. If you want something that's available in Europe, you can get it. Trust me. You got the money, you got the time, you can get whatever you want. Now, was she using a Nova One ears? Those earrings look exactly like Nova One's H1s. Now, do I have any additional proof that something was going on, that she's had an earpiece in and people were feeding her information? I don't know. I'm just telling you, that's the big story that's going on out there right now. So now you know what's going on. The debate was a unmitigated 3-on-1 free-for-all. That's my opinion. And nothing was talked about policy. And when she was asked, is America better off today than they were 4 years ago? She did not answer. That might be the entire explanation of the entire event that I watched. But that's my opinion on it. That's all I've got. So, that's it for now. See ya. Well, I suppose you've heard that Taylor Swift, the nationwide international star of music, has gone political and has come out and said, I'm casting my vote for Kamala Harris. I've been giving him, $4 million, whatever that story is. She has done something that could, and I'm saying could, affect her pocketbook. Now you're going to say, what? She's an international star. People are spending gazillions of dollars. You got a concert coming up down in Indianapolis next year but people are just buying tickets like nobody's business. Well, got to be careful on that, folks. Dolly Parton a long time ago was asked, does she support anybody political? Dolly says, no, I don't do that. Because if I do that, I'm going to upset half of the people who like what I do. And if half of the people don't like what you do and don't buy your records, you're going to be out cashola. Money. Going public, especially in political season, in a very heated political season, saying I support one candidate over the other possibly can affect your financial well-being. Now you're going to say, nah, I can't have a Taylor Swift. She's so powerful. She's so good. Nah, nobody's going to be bothered by it. Well, remember the Dixie Chicks? Yeah, they were very, very popular, Dixie Chicks. Woo! But they came out against George W. Bush, if memory serves me correct, said some things, and suddenly the Dixie Chicks disappeared, fell off the charts. I don't know what they do now, and I don't know if any of them have tried to resurge their career in any way, shape, or form. I couldn't tell you. But I remember that happening, and I'm just trying to say to you, be careful, folks. Coming out in a hot political season saying I support somebody over somebody else may be a bad thing to do if you depend on those people, everybody, to give you money. You make me mad, I may not give you money. It's a fact of life. Just saying that's something you got to be careful of. Now, I realize that Patrick Mahomes' wife, I think her name was Brittany, she came out in favor of Trump. Hey, she doesn't sing, she doesn't dance, she's just the wife of a football player. And she's entitled to do that if she wants to. Is she earning money from people because of her husband? No. But she's an individual. I understand that anybody can support anybody they want. But if you depend upon people giving you money and half of them don't like who you're following, you may take it in the pocketbook. Just my thought. Just by saying. If I could be wrong, all right, maybe. But you know what? Politics is ugly. And it's gotten uglier. And now, depends on who you support, it could cost you in the pocketbook very, very deeply. Just a thought. That's all I have for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, allow me to bring you up to date on the latest information I have concerning that terrible shooting that took place down in Georgia. That young 14-year-old, I think his name was Colt Gray, shot and killed 4 people at his school in Georgia. Well, here's more you didn't know about. We know that his father has been charged with giving his son a semi-automatic rifle, and his son was 14 years of age. We also know his son had some serious problems, one of which he talked about shooting up his middle school, and the FBI found out about it, contacted the sheriff's department in that area. They then went to the house, talked to the father and son, and both denied anything was going on. Without probable cause, the sheriff's department couldn't do anything about it. They wrote the report up and said, okay, that's fine, but here's something we didn't know, and now we do know. Approximately 30 minutes before the shooting happened, Colt's mother, her name is Margie Gray. She lives in another city a couple of 100 miles away from where her son lives because her mother and father divorced. Ugly divorce, apparently. I mean, seriously ugly divorce. Has 3 kids involved. 2 live with the mother and the son live with the father. Well, anyway, the mother receives a text message from her son, says, "I'm sorry, Mom." She immediately calls the school where her son goes and said, hey, you've got to get somebody to find my son and make sure he's okay immediately. Now, you know what that tells me? She knew something. She knew what this kid was capable of doing and what he was probably going to do. That's why she called the school and said, "You got to get somebody to see my son now." And then she and her sister jumped in a car and drove 200 miles back to the town in which the father and the son lived. All right. She knew something was wrong with her son. And apparently the father and son had been evicted on some places they previously lived. The son couldn't get along in school. Apparently the kids were picking on him, according to the father. And he was harassed. Some were calling him gay and whatever. I don't know about any of that, but I do know this. Now that I've heard all these things, I can tell you right now, if I am the lawyer representing this kid, I'm probably going to file a plea deal into the case, guilty but mentally deranged. That's right. Guilty but, well, crazy. Best thing I can say. Mentally incompetent. And yes, he did it, but mentally he wasn't in the right mind. Now, state of Georgia, you commit a heinous crime, you're young, you could be held in prison for the rest of your life, even at age 14. So there's a problem there. But what we're seeing right now is the public defenders, because neither the father nor the son have regular attorneys, they've got public defenders. And I'm guessing the public defender is going to say, "Your Honor, my client is guilty but mentally ill." And that may be the best option they have yet for the kid to be placed in some sort of mental health facility or whatever. Remember the John Hinckley days, shooting president, all those things that happened back a long time ago when Reagan was shot? All right, let's keep that in mind. I'm guessing this is going to be the same type of a defense is going to be used to save this young man's life. And the mother, she knew. She knew something was happening. So should she be charged also? That's not for me to call. That's for the prosecutors. We shall see what happens. But now you know the latest information involving the terrible shooting that took 4 lives and injured many more in Georgia by a young man who obviously was mentally deranged. That's all I've got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, I want to talk to you about something called Project 2025. You may have heard it been discussed. You may have heard the Democrats saying, "Oh my gosh, they put this in, you're going to lose your schools, you're going to lose everything." Project 2025. Here's something you need to know. Project 2025 was actually created by the Heritage Foundation clear back in 1980. It was a program put together by people who had worked in government and knew a whole bunch of stuff and knew what worked and what didn't. And basically, it was a roadmap. That here's the things we suggest you do in government. And it was presented to Ronald Reagan. And he was kind of enthusiastic about it. Matter of fact, Edmund Meese was his head of his transition team. And he said, there's got some good ideas in here. He said, people we choose for the cabinet, you make sure they each get a copy of the book. And they did. Now, not everybody liked what was in the book, but everybody got a copy of it. Well, that was started in 1980. It's been revised every year. And obviously now it's been revised into 2025 as a concept idea for things that maybe a government should consider. And this has been attached to Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump said, "Hey, wait a minute. I didn't write this. I've got nothing to do with this. Some of this stuff in this crazier than all get out. And I ain't tied to it." Democrats are going, "No, we're going to tie him to it. We got to. We got to hit him up with anything we can, saying he's going to do this, he's going to do that." He's not on board with Project 2025. He says some things are good in there. He didn't have a problem with some of those things. But he said, "Yeah, for the most part, nah, not into the concept. It ain't going to work." And so there's the problem. And here's the deal that's going on. The concern right now is, well, how are the Democrats going to use this? Will it work? Well, the problem is this. Too many people going to do that, and Trump is going to do all these things, and they're accusing him of doing all these potential things, like getting rid of that one, only because it's one of the things that's been suggested, saying that was a bad plan, and it's going to destroy the education for your children. All these things they're talking about that would happen if he actually supported the Heritage Foundation. Now, here's the problem. Well, the problem is too many people are going, you know, I don't understand what 2025 is. But one of the things I thought was interesting in the original the original Heritage Foundation report, it recommended against affirmative action. You hear me? Document was against affirmative action. And in the new 1981 administration, and here's what it said, should base its civil rights policy on the notion that every person has an inherent right to obtain whatever economic or other rewards he or she has earned by virtue of merit, and that it is inherently wrong to penalize those who have earned their reward by giving preferential treatment and benefits to those who have not. That was in the original document against affirmative action. Trump said, "Hey, I'm not into this." And some of the stuff he said is crazy. But the Democrats are going to try to tag it on to him because they are looking for anything they got. So now you know what it was. Originally, Heritage Foundation, 1980, been updated every year, every potential president. And by the way, they've gone to the left and say, hey, Democrats, here's an idea. Democrats don't want anything to do with it. Well, right now, Trump is saying pretty much the same thing. But now you know what's going on, what Project 2025 is, and realize it's not what you think it is, and don't be too concerned. That's all I got for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, allow me to tell you what politics is doing in the United States of America, how we work, and how we're perceived probably by other countries around the world. As you may be aware, Robert Kennedy Jr., he has indicated that he wants his name taken off the ballot of states around the United States. And in some states, it can be done. Now, in Indiana, it can't be done because the deadline has already passed and the name stays on the ballot. But he specifically requested two states, Wisconsin and Michigan, and he wants to take my name off the ballot. Well, the folks in Michigan say, well, we have laws that don't let us do that, or you have to do this under the law, or you have to do that under the law. Well, as a result, the people who run Michigan and Wisconsin said, no. We're leaving your name on the ballot, dude. Why? Well, because there's a major fear that about 5 or 6% of people could sway an entire election. If they voted instead of for the Kennedy folks would vote for Trump. That's the guess. Nobody knows if that's going to happen, but that's pretty much the guess. And so the states have said, sorry, we're leaving your name on the ballot to make sure that you vote for Kennedy on the ballot and you don't vote for Trump. This is how we play the game of politics in America. We do everything possible to prevent the other side from winning. But surprisingly enough, some attitudes that happen in a candidate's party might make a difference for where people vote. And help me give you a particular example that has just happened that caught my attention. And I realized that two people have been named to the potential transition party if Donald Trump is reelected. Now, a transition party, those are the people that select the folks who are going to run the government. What happens is if a person gets elected, well, that's in November, but they don't take office until the next January. So they've got to be the ones setting everything up, getting everybody in, the new people in the cabinet, the new people in all the various offices of the government that they control. And being in that transition party, which gives you an immense amount of power, and puts you right there in the place where the president can appoint you to a very, very high office, like a cabinet member or the head of some big, big, giant situation. Well, it turns out President Trump has just named 2 individuals to his transition team if he wins. Those 2 individuals are Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a former Democrat, and Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, a former Democrat. What has he done? He's appointed 2 former Democrats to his transition team to set up the next government if Trump wins. Now, is it possible that those 2 individuals could become cabinet members? Oh, yes, it is. Could they become even higher than that? Chief of staff, those kind of things? High mucky mucks in the White House? Oh, yeah. All depends. But Robert F. Kennedy's name will be on the ballot in Michigan and in Wisconsin because the Democrats want to make sure those votes going to him stay with him and don't go to Donald J. Trump. Just telling you what's going on, how election works in America, and folks, it ain't pretty. All I got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, folks, I want to talk to you about something today I call how the Department of Defense went woke. You heard me right. The Department of Defense went woke. Now, I'm saying this as someone who served the United States military. I started serving in 1970, and I finished up and retired in 1995. So, kind of gives you an idea what I've been through and what people I've served under over the years. Now, it used to be, we fought 2 gigantic wars in this country, World War I, World War II. And everything was based on merit back in those days. The best of the best got promoted. Well, unfortunately, that changed. And that changed back in 1948 when President Truman, said we must have fair representation. Now, the issues that I'm going to be talking about came forth from a number of sources. One, Presidents Harry Truman, LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. Now, notice those were all Democrat presidents, and they wrote these executive orders, EOs they call them. And those EOs changed the United States military from a merit-based organization into what we call a proportional representation. That's right. Everything today in the military is proportional representation. And this starts out with recruiting strategies. Now we've created in the D.O.D, Department of Defense, we've created what amounts to is identity groups. You got to have this group, you got to have that group. And now we're saying in all of those groups, you must have a certain amount of proportional representation, whether it's in, say, aviation, combat operations, command, everything has to be proportional. And that's a danger. And I'll tell you why it's a danger, because we have to understand how we got there, because if you are not using the best of the best to do a job, the military people, our job is to kill people and break stuff. That's what our job is. That's what warriors are. Fought 2 wars. We did exactly that. We haven't won a major war since 1991. Yes, we won the Gulf War. But can we win a war in today's world? I don't believe so. Sorry. I don't believe we could do it because we have become woke. And it's changed a lot of things. Harry Truman started it back in 1948. So we got to have proportional people. That had to do with the amount of blacks who were brought into the military. So it has to be consistent with the nation. So if the nation had, say, 12% black representation, you had to have 12% in the military. Everything had to be equal. And then there was the EO called 9981, because that's how they're numbered. And what that did was, in the files, military files, your race was actually considered in the files. They removed those. All race delineations and files were gone. It was done as a race-blind decisions and executive orders. Once again, all right, fine. Everybody's got to be done, but proportional representation. And then, 64 came the Civil Rights Movement and another EO 10308. That was racial equality. This goes back. You're going back once again into the era of LBJ. And then, well, then the word was, hey, when it came to African Americans, they have to be a total percentage of the United States military regardless. You can't exclude them. You must have them, but they must be proportional. And back in the time when he did this, it was about 10%. Today it's about 12%. Now, LBJ signed another executive order, 11246, the equal employment in the military, and said everything's got to be equal in the military, 100% equal. Well, his Secretary of Defense, McNamara, he kind of overdid the whole thing on the executive order and created what was called the Equal Employment Opportunity Program. This went all the way into changing out what things were allowed. In the Vietnam recruiting program, Vietnam was a bad time. We were drafting people didn't want to go. But what happened was during that era, McNamara said, we've got to change the enlistment standards. And they did. They changed the standards for mental acuity, physical criteria. Those were all lowered. They brought down the bar. And they lowered the scores on the AFOQT, Air Force Officer, Air Force Qualification Test. They lowered the bar to get people in who didn't meet the normal standards. And the reason for that was they wanted to get young men from the inner cities who didn't meet those standards. And that's why they did it. That's what this is all about. Bring in people. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yep. That changed things in our colleges, our military colleges. West Point had to be proportional. Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, everything had to be proportional. And regardless of the best of the best, no, it wasn't about best of the best. It was about proportional. We got to have X from this group, X from this group, X from this group. That's how it was, and that's how it was changed over the years. Then there were Supreme Court cases. Yes, those things make changes too. There's one called Griggs versus Duke Power. Well, that changed the changed recruiting situations. They literally had to go to direct programs to recruit certain organizations, certain individuals, certain groups. You had to go out and directly recruit those. And because of racial disparity situations. That's how that came up. And then back in the Bill Clinton administration, back in 1982, making 1992, when he came in, he changed the rules involving homosexuals in the military. That was done by Bill Clinton back in the 90s. And he pledged to his followers he would open the military to homosexuals and other diversity initiatives. I'll tell you, that's a problem. And so they decided to remake the military. This is what they were doing, folks. Remaking the military into the image of the progressive left. This is what they did. You're no longer a fighting force. You're the image of the progressive left because they were in power and they could do it. Now, proportional representation. Once again, I keep talking about that. That amounts to, frankly, racial quotas and diversity. Diversity and inequality, and that's what the military came to. Military was running the DEI stuff long before it even started. Obama administration, they established another program called the Diversity Management and Equal Opportunity, and it changed once again the military. More missing with the United States military, so it met the progressive left ideology. That's what it did. And even today, This is the center of how the D.O.D. continues to work today. Now, let's talk about women in the military. I don't have any problem with that, frankly. It used to be women were not allowed in the military. They weren't allowed into combat situations. Those things have all changed, and I don't have any problem with that. We've got women military pilots, and some of the best of the best. They're really very good. They were allowed to come into combat situations. It didn't used to be that you could have women on naval ships. Well, they're there now. Women in submarines, yes, they're there now. Accommodations were made because they want to say, hey, women have a right to be in there because they make up more than half of the population. The courts and the Congress made those rulings. That's why they exist. Back in 1980, Jimmy Carter, just before he left office, had executive order number 12250 and had to do with non-discrimination laws. And gender equality was once again on the keynote. That's what this was all about, gender equality. Another Supreme Court case called Rosker versus Goldberg in 1981. That one says, here it is a deal, that only males could be drafted into the military. That's the case. Rosker versus Goldberg, 1981. Supreme Court decided on that. Pretty much stare decisis nowadays. All right? Now, back in 1992, so Congress did things. They created the Presidential Commission on Assignment of Women in the Armed Forces. And then Bill Clinton came along, and he said, hey, the rules that don't allow women to serve in combat roles, he ended them. He said, hey, we ain't having that. Women can serve everywhere they want. Anything they want to do, anything a guy is doing. We had to change the standards to allow it, though. The physical standards, the emotional standards, the mental standards, all the things that, well, men and women are different. I don't care who you are. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Bill Clinton said, nope, they're all together. They're all the same. And that's changed things. And then Congress, with their fiscal year 1998, they made even more women in the military, saying they could be in the combat roles. So it's not just presidents, folks. The Congress and the courts. All of this has been done over the years. And today, here's something you may not want to hear. We can't win a war. Sorry. We don't have the force to do it. We don't have the people to do it. And worst of all, we can't get recruits to join the military. You wonder why? Simple. They don't want to join because, well, it's the military, and the military is not the same as it used to be. Mothers don't want their kids going into the military for the stuff they're seeing in there. That's what we're dealing with, America. And right now, the military can't recruit people. They can't get people to come in. They're falling short of their numbers, and they're not really sure what they're going to have to do. They may have to lower the standards even more, try to get more people to come in. That's what happens when you have an all-volunteer military that's woke, that practices DEI. I call it DIE. All this military has destroyed a once great, powerful military that was able to win 2 world wars. Now, can we win a war? Well, I don't think so. So I said recently, during World War II, 12% of Americans served in the United States military. The Vietnam era dropped down to about 3%. Today, the number of people who serve in the United States military, slightly more than 1%. And these are the people that you want to save your butt when something goes up and if the big flag goes up. Do we have a military good enough to do that today? Many of us who served in the past say, I don't think so. Because we're too diverse, too DEI-oriented, and frankly, too woke. Can we solve that? I don't really believe we can. Too many things have been done. They've made a fighting force into what I consider a bunch of wussies. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. That's the way I feel. You may not, and I understand that. But until you've walked a mile in a military man's shoes, you don't have a word to say. That's my opinion on it. That's all I got for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, let me tell you how politics works in America. And frankly, folks, it ain't pretty. The Democrats, the Republicans, two parties, they each want power. How do they get power? How do they retain power? I'm about to give you your history lesson and call it social studies if you want. Here's the deal. When Joe Biden got into office, he took all the executive orders that Donald Trump had written involving immigration, and people come across the border, tore them up, and said, no, they're getting rid of them because he's executive officers, they're executive orders, they can be rescinded by the next president if he chooses to, and he did. Millions of people came across the border. Now, why did Joe Biden want that to happen? Well, simply put, he realizes that the United States Census, which happens every 10 years, where the government says and the Constitution says that you count persons. The number of persons that you have determines your census. Has nothing to do with their nationality or whether they're illegal here or not. It's a person. That's what says the Constitution. The Supreme Court already ruled on that. All right, so what the governors did in the states that were being inundated with all these folks coming in, you're talking about, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, other states, Florida probably a little bit too. They said, okay, well, we're going to ship all these people into the Democrat states, sanctuary cities, where they're taking in illegals and saying we're not going to deal with the police. So they put them on buses, put them on planes, shipped them to all these cities. Well, the mayors of those cities were obligated to give those people shelter, money, whatever they wanted. New York City, high-rise places. Other cities are putting them up in beautiful apartment complexes, all in hopes that eventually those people will be beholding to the mayors and the party, the Democrat Party, in each of those states that are blue states. All right, so you get the idea now. Here's the deal. Going back to the census, 6 years from now, the census is going to count bodies. Now, if we have 12 million new aliens that have come across and they get counted, there's 700,000 people in the district. So if you have a congressman, that congressman or woman represents 700,000 people. You have another 12 million people, well, you're going to have a whole bunch of new congressmen, roughly what, maybe 15? And the Republicans are saying, 15 new congressmen, that ain't good because, and the Democrats are going, no, that's very good. Because they're hoping those new representatives who are feeling obligated to the Democrats for what they did will put them in office, and that gives them 15 more members of the House of Representatives, which would give them the majority. That's what they want. All right, so that's how they're doing it. Okay, we're going to just get these new members in, and they're going to come Democrats, won't be enough Republicans, and we'll be in charge of the House. That's the way the plan is working. All right, so what they're doing now is saying, okay, fine, they're going to bring in bodies, that's going to change the House. But here's something else nobody thinks about. For every new member, every state that gets that new member gets one additional electoral vote. That means states getting more electoral votes in their area puts them even more powerful in the election chain. So if you get a whole lot more electoral votes, pretty soon your state becomes more powerful because you got a lot of control in the voting. All right, that's what we're dealing on. Now, the concern is, speaking of voting. Well, what the plan is, as you probably have heard, a recent study indicated that roughly 14% of illegal aliens, immigrants, call them what you will, have been registered to vote. And it's a lot of places where you get a driver's license, and states give them out. You're automatically registered to vote. So there's people who probably could be voting in the election. Now, so what's going to happen is the Republicans said, okay, it's our turn to do something to stop this. And what they did this past summer, they introduced a thing called the Safeguard American Voting Eligibility Act. Now, the acronym means SAVE, S-A-V-E. That's the SAVE Act, it's called. Now, what that's going to require is that someone has to produce proof of citizenship when they register to vote. So they're saying, hey, we're going to stop the illegals from registering to vote because they have to produce documentation that they are a citizen. Well, that's all well and good to pass the House. It's now into the Senate. Senate obviously doesn't want that. But if they turn down, well, the Republicans got something to argue to say, hey, now you want illegals to vote. That's what you want. Many states do not have requirements to show any identification voting. You go to the West Coast, California, Oregon, Nevada. Hey, you walk in and say, I want to vote. You get to vote. Indiana, show your ID. Many states have that now. Well, what they're requiring is that, hey, you got to have documentation to show that you're legally here to get registered to vote. Now, that's the problem because back in 2013, the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. But recently, Arizona did something a little bit different. Back in August of 2024, a few months back, the Supreme Court actually allowed Arizona to enforce a law that says you got to provide notification of your citizenship, and that was required to vote. Now, that entire thing is under appeal right now. We don't know what the Supreme Court's going to rule. But understand what the game here is. The game is getting power, getting control, getting votes, getting people on your side, regardless. This is the game they're playing, whether it's through the Constitution and the counting and the census, whether it's providing documentation to prove you're a citizen, or whether it's registering people and getting people, once they become counted in the census and a new representative will vote for a Democrat. It's all a matter, folks, about getting power, keeping power, and controlling with your party. That's what this is all about. In case you haven't figured it out, there's your social studies exercise for today. You can go forth and talk among yourselves. That's all I got for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
You know, to many people in the United States, the Kennedy family has been considered, well, pretty much royalty. I mean, you think about it, you go back to JFK and Teddy and Bobby Kennedy. I mean, even in my youth, the Kennedys were considered royalty, and everything they did was supreme and perfect and what have you. All the way goes back to Joe Kennedy, the father, and all the things that he did. Once again, the family was considered royalty. JFK became president. You know, Jackie Kennedy and the word got out that frankly, whether it's Bobby Kennedy or JFK, there wasn't a woman they weren't willing to take advantage of. Okay, can I be pretty honest about that? They were fooling around, and apparently all the Kennedy men were doing that. But the women in the Kennedy family allowed it. Because, once again, we're all royalty, we're all blood. And now, apparently that goes on in royal families everywhere, maybe even across the pond, you know? So anyway, all the Kennedys are just have terrible episodes involving messing around, okay? The worst one, of course, is Bobby Kennedy, or Ted Kennedy, Mary Jo Kopechne driving off the bridge. Woman's dead. Yeah, that was the worst one, and he got away with it. There was a Kennedy clan that things have happened in the Kennedy clan that are just outrageous, but America accepted it because, well, they're Kennedys. However, one thing happened that apparently the Kennedy clan will not allow to happen. Turns out that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. decided he wanted to run against Joe Biden in the primaries for the presidential primary. When he did, he was suddenly estranged by his family. His blood relatives, sisters, those kind of things, turned on him like he was a snake. That's what happened. They disavowed he even existed. And they said some terrible things about JFK because he was running against Joe Biden. And worst of all, when he said, okay, fine, I'm going to become an independent, and then decided, he said, well, you know what? I'm going to back Trump. Even worse. Bobby Kennedy has now been completely removed from the Kennedy family in toto. They want nothing to do with him. He's a pariah. He is like a bastard child to the Kennedys, and they cannot excuse any of this because he sinfully shamed the royal family of Kennedy. Just saying what happened, and Bobby Kennedy said, you know what? I'm going to do what I got to do. And the Kennedy family now has disowned him totally. He's a persona non grata to the royal family of the United States. Just something to think about. So maybe when you're running for some political office down the road, see if your family is going to support you or turn against you like a snake. That's what they do in the Kennedy world. You violate the rules, you pay the price. Just saying what's going on. That's all I have for you right now. Just an aside in the world of the royal family. That's all I got. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, what do you say I take you on a little trip? And that trip is going to take you down to Del Rio, Texas. Now, you're saying, Del Rio, Texas? Who goes to Del Rio, Texas? Well, it used to be one of the Air Force places to train pilots back in the old days. But that's gone now. But I want to take you down to a gun shop down there. Humphrey's Gun Shop. Now, Mr. Humphreys has been selling guns since 1972, over 50 years. He understands what the gun trade is, and anybody who's been in business that long selling guns understands there's a lot of rules, regulations, and things you have to do. But he's noted one thing. He said, in all my years of selling this, he says, I have never in my life seen as many women showing up to purchase a handgun. Think about that for a second. This is Del Rio, Texas, and I realize there's a problem on the border and people coming across. But this is not just happening in Texas, folks. This is happening across America. People are going out there, especially women, are going out there and purchasing handguns. Now, I'll tell you what, I certainly hope they get properly trained in the use of those things, because if they're not, they're about as dangerous as you can get to be. But the concern is that our government is letting people into this country who have no business being in this country, and I'll tell you who they are. There's a gang out there called Tren de Agua, and you've watched on TV, maybe you've seen the problems in Colorado, where an entire apartment complex was taken over by this gang. However, the Colorado governor says, oh, it's just a figment of imagination, it's not really real. Yeah, that's politics for you. But it's happening in cities around the United States. It isn't just in Denver, Colorado. It's Dallas, Texas. It's New York. It's major cities. Tren de Agua is expanding every single day because more and more people are coming in from those countries and they're joining those gangs. And it's not the only gang, folks. There's another one called MS-13. They are really brutal. Most MS-13 right now has been concentrated pretty much on the East Coast, New York, and that area. And they're trying to take them out. MS-13, this is where you see the people in prison with the massive tattoos all over the face. Massive tattoos. That will tell you pretty much MS-13 right there. Tren de Agua is a whole different animal. These were former prisoners that were released by their emperor of their country, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, in particular, Venezuela. Then Hugo Chavez just said, I got all these problem guys in prison, these bad groups. Heck, I'm going to let them out and send them to America. And that's what he did. They exist in America now, and they're multiplying in hordes. And they're coming to cities, and people are getting scared, and rightfully so, because the government doesn't want to do anything about it. Because you see, bringing in new people is bringing in new potential bodies for census count. Census count means more representatives, more power, more electoral power, and getting people changed into voting. Because here's something you may not know. A study has been done, and they discovered that 14% of illegal aliens in this country, illegal immigrants, call them whatever you want, 14% are registered to vote. You heard me right. 14% are registered to vote. Now you're going to say, well, hey, this could all been stopped. The Republicans stopped a whole immigration bill that the Congress wanted to do. Let me tell you a little something about that immigration bill. If I was in Congress, I would have voted no myself, and the reason is, what this bill allows is illegals to come across in the United States 5,000 a day. Okay? 5,000 a day. In 30 days, that's 150,000. In 30 days. In 1 year, 1.5 million with an M, okay? That's how many people would be coming into the United States every single year across the border who we don't know, can't vet, and don't know a thing about them. You want your country to be taken over and you want America no longer to be the United States of America? Let that happen. That's exactly what you're going to get. So yes, American women buying guns. America's buying guns. Because gangs like Tren de Agua and the MS-13 are taking over America. And nobody's stopping them. And the problem is, that's left to the citizens. It's you and me. Just saying what's going on. Maybe it's something for you to think about the next time you go walking into a store and praying that you walk out okay. Just something to think about. That's all I have for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, here's a rather disturbing statistic I just read. It said that nearly 1/4 of United States U.S. adults without college degrees say they have no close friends. And I'm going, what? 1/4 of people without college degrees have no close friends? And they say that people without college degrees have less participation in social activities like, well, going to parks or restaurants than college-educated adults. And I'm going, wait a minute. That's just sort of stupid, isn't it? And they say this has resulted in loneliness and social isolation for people without college degrees. I'm sorry, but I happen to know people without college degrees, and they happen to be friends of mine, and they have close friends of theirs. And for them to say, well, back in the old days, it was like 2-3% of people without college degrees were lonely or whatever, or didn't have close friends. But it's now reached 1/4 of the population of people without college degrees, which to me is about as nutty as it gets when you think about it. Frankly, who on earth is going to say, well, gee whiz, if you don't have a college degree, you're going to be isolated. You're not going to have close friends. Trust me. There are people out there with college degrees. Not everybody's got a damn college degree. And frankly, not everyone needs one in today's society. I know people that don't have college degrees and are making far more money than I make because they have a trade, they have a skill. These people aren't college educated, and they have plenty of friends. And you know what? That's the problem that we have. Now people are looking for ways to say, oh, you must have a college degree, and if you don't, you're going to be lonely and isolated. Balderdash. It's nonsense. It's probably stupid as you think about it, but people without degrees are not necessarily lonely. And for someone to sit there and say, well, yes, they are. They're very lonely, and if they have a college degree, they're not going to be lonely and they're going to have friends. Who writes this stuff? Who thinks this stuff up? And who runs these kind of idiotic surveys to create these kind of articles? I mean, like I said, I'm reading the articles here and I'm going, where does this stuff come from? Saying that people without college degrees don't have close friends. That's about as nonsensical as it gets. I'm just telling you what I think. Yes, do I have a college degree? Of course. But I know people without them. And I have friends without them. And you know what? They're still good friends of mine. Doesn't really matter. Having friends is associations. You don't need a degree to suddenly say, well, they've got friends that don't have friends because I don't have a degree. It's stupid, folks. And whoever's coming up with these kind of surveys, I don't know what they're drinking or smoking, but whatever it is, it probably ain't legal. Just saying. That's my opinion, and I think it's a stupid survey, but I had to tell you about it because, well, you got to discuss stupid things, even with stupid people who do them. That's all I got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, here's something I want you to take a look at because, in a lot of ways, it's more important than you think. And here's the deal. This article says that John Deere, the maker of farming implementations, is now laying off 300 people plus in plants in Iowa. Now you're going to say, well, that's not really a whole lot. That's 300 people. They must employ thousands. Well, like many companies, yes, they do. But let's tie this together so you understand what's going on. General Motors and Ford, the car manufacturing people, have announced they're starting to lay people off in various plants, close down various brands names, because the currently from the Stellantis group, whatever they call themselves, their CEO is looking at shutting down some more name brands in the United States. Cars aren't selling. They're going to close down the plants. Those people get put out of jobs. But this is a bigger one. This is John Deere. Now you're saying, well, it's not a big deal, 300 bucks. John Deere makes implements that farmers use. If farmers aren't buying equipment, farmers then don't need equipment. And why don't farmers need equipment? Because farmers are being shoved off of their lands. That's what's happening, folks. More and more farmers are finding out, well, it's easier to put in solar panels than to grow crops. You realize that only a certain number of companies, organizations, corporations, call them what you will, own farmland, and more farmland, more personally owned, family-owned farms are disappearing in America. They are disappearing because corporations are buying them up. And the problem is with taxation, that say someone starts a farm up from 100 years ago, passes it down to their kids when they pass on. Well, now they want to tax that even higher in a death tax to make people have to sell their farms just to pay for the taxes on it. And major corporations are buying up those farms. And then, worst of all, foreign countries. You heard me right. Foreign countries are buying up acreage like nothing you have ever seen in America. They are buying up the farmlands that our people have farmed and created crops for years. And what's going to happen with those foreigners who are buying up the farmland? What are they going to do with it? I can't tell you. I don't know. But when a company like John Deere starts laying people off, hundreds, that tells you that something's going on and it ain't good. Is this going to affect what we can find on our tables? Or maybe not find on our tables? The food that we eat might be disappearing in our country. I hate to say that. That's a very dire forecast, but it's not a good one. When farm companies and implement countries, suddenly nobody's buying the product and they have to lay people off, something bad is afoot. And it could be very, very bad. Just telling you my opinion on what I'm seeing in this article, hundreds of Deere employees laid off at John Deere, the major manufacturer it has been for hundreds of years, couple of years, whatever. It's happening, folks, and it ain't pretty. That's what I know. Keep an eye on it. It's your country. It's your food. And you may not have it in the future. Just saying. That's all I have for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, I have a story for you. I don't think you're going to believe, but it's actually true, and I had to tell you about it. Story took place in Phoenix, Arizona at a Wells Fargo bank. Wells Fargo Bank in Phoenix, Arizona. Seems a 60-year-old woman by the name of Denise Prudhomme checked into work at 7 a.m. on August the 16th. Goes to her cubicle, wherever it happens to be in the bank, and, well, 4 days later, security calls the police and said, "Hey, we got a dead body in our bank." because people said something smells bad. Police came in, investigated, and sure enough, there was Denise Prudhomme sitting at her desk, dead. 4 days. And nobody noticed. Now think about that. What if you went to your office and you died and nobody said anything to you, nobody noticed anything, and left you there for 4 days and never said a word until you started stinking up the place? Medical examiners saying, well, we don't see any foul play going on here, but what amazing to me is, was this woman not liked? I mean, did they have her put in some little area that nobody knew about in the bank? She was in a cubicle. I mean, don't you walk by cubicles at work? Hey, how you doing? Hey, what's going on? Well, somebody talk to somebody? Somebody get up and didn't anybody know who she was? I mean, is this the way we have gotten in our society, that everybody sits in their own little cubicle, their own little world, and nobody knows nothing about nobody else? So if you die, nobody knows about it. Well, this is apparently what happened in Phoenix, Arizona at a Wells Fargo bank. So think about that now. Gee, I'm going to go into work. Hope I don't die at work. That way nobody's going to notice that I'm dead. Ask yourself, how could that happen? This was a bank. Don't people in banks talk to each other? I mean, if you got a cubicle, it means you got to be cubicle with other people around you, right? Or was she not liked? Was she ostracized by everybody? Was she a persona non grata? I don't know. All I'm telling you is, that's the latest story that I thought I would pass along to you, that a 60-year-old woman at a bank in Arizona goes in, checks into work at 7 o'clock in the morning, and 4 days later they found she's dead and nobody said anything. Nobody saw anything. The only way they found her is because it smelled bad in their bank. Just something to pass along to you. So keep that in mind. Ask your kids or something like that, saying, hey, if I die in work, somebody hopefully will see me and say something. In Ms. Prudhomme's case, nobody said a word, and she was left dead for 4 days. Boy, where have we come to in America? Just saying. That's all I got for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
All right, I want to talk to you about something in the world of politics that shows you how things are going and what politicians will do in order to get themselves elected in this country. Now, I don't know if you're a fan of college sports, but there's a thing called NIL, name, image, and likeness. The NCAA has had to adopt what amounts to is paying college athletes for being college athletes and bringing money into their schools. Now, this is a big thing going on. If you're in a big university, they're offering money to the students. Hey, come and play at our school. We'll pay you a lot of money. That's really what it's turned out to be, because the courts have stepped in and said, hey, you can't just make money off these students. So the colleges had to come up with this NIL. All right, normally you would think that only goes to the college paying the student to come and play football at their place. Nay, friends. Up in Montana, the senator of Montana, I think his name is Tester, maybe John Tester, I believe. That's correct. His organization supporting him. Now, he says he has no knowledge of them, doesn't know who they are, doesn't deal with them. But an organization is going to college students in Montana and offering them money to do commercials saying, hey, vote for John Tester. I'm not making this up, folks. They'll pay you anywhere from $400 for 2 scripted videos, $800 for 2 unscripted videos. Unscripted is sort of like you say whatever you want to say and nobody gives you a script to say it. Or the big gadilla is $2,400 for 4 unscripted videos. Doesn't say how long the videos are, doesn't say what you have to say, but they're going to athletes in Montana and saying, hey, do this. Well, one young lady received a letter from this advertising agency, for lack of a better term, saying, hey, do this, speak your piece, make money. And she said, wait a minute. This John Tester is the guy that voted against a law that the Republicans wanted to put in, saying that only girls are girls and boys are boys when it comes to athletics. Ladies, they participate in their sport. The guys participate in their sports. And he voted against it. And she says, you want me to do commercials for this guy who wants to take away my chance to earn medals? Yeah, that's what we're dealing with, folks. This is the way politics has degenerated into probably the worst form you could possibly think of. This is where we are. This is what people will do to literally get themselves into office so they can run your life. Hiring college students to do commercials about them. That's the way it is, folks. Just thought I'd pass that along to you. A little something to make your day to understand just how bad we have gotten in the world of politics. So all I got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, if you're a fan of racing and you're a fan of NASCAR, this might be something that might interest you. It seems that down in Indianapolis, the original version of NASCAR Brickyard 400 is finally going to return to the Indianapolis Oval as an oval race, not a road course, an oval race. 2025 in July, NASCAR is returning with the Brickyard 400 to Indianapolis. Now, I don't know about you, but when it came to Indianapolis, my wife and I, we were thrilled about seeing that. Man, seeing NASCAR down in Indianapolis, the greatest spectacle in racing racetrack, the Brickyard. I mean, that was something cool. We were there, and we attended every single race for 10 years. 10 years. Sat in the inside, above the pits, in the shade. Pretty nice. And we enjoyed it. We enjoyed the race. We enjoyed just the ambiance, the whole thing. And first race, seeing Jeff Gordon. And one year, I remember it was raining down in India, and they weren't sure if they were going to have the race or not. We were at my brother-in-law's place. And they said, no, we're going to have the race. And suddenly we jumped in the car and headed over to the track. You could hear the sound of those cars a couple of miles away. I mean, 750 horsepower cars. We were walking up to the track. I don't remember how long the walk was, but yes, you could hear the cars. We attended every single race. I mean, that was part of life. I had the headsets on, the radio. I was listening to the Nashville or the Motor Racing Network. That's what we did. Ate food, drank beer, whatever. Had a good time. And then a race came. I think it was the 10th year. I could be wrong. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But Goodyear gave them bad tires. And the tires were so bad, they had to bring out the caution, change tires on the cars like every 10 laps. I paid a lot of money for those tickets to go see that for my wife and I, and we were disgusted. And it was terrible. And we stopped going. And over the years, eventually, a lot of people stopped going also. I mean, you could notice it when you look down the track and the suites there were suites that were empty. Nobody there. In the beginning, everybody wanted to be at Brickyard. Everybody wanted to see Jeff Gordon winning. You wanted to see these great racers running in their tin tops, 200 miles an hour, hitting the pits, making the quick changes, all the stuff they did. And the wrecks, and you watched it on video and all that stuff going on. But then that one race, and my wife and I became discouraged with NASCAR, stopped going. A lot of people did. And eventually it kind of lost favor down in Indianapolis, and now it turned into a road track. Well, now it's coming back, folks. Now the Brickyard 400 in July of 2025 is returning to the Oval, where it belongs. Hopefully, a lot of folks will show up, and hopefully it'll be a big crowd. Not sure if I'm going to be there. At my age, it's getting tough to do that kind of stuff. But maybe you will.
Maybe you'll enjoy NASCAR and see all the young folks, the new people, the new racing. So NASCAR on the Oval returns to Indianapolis in July of 2024. You might check on getting your tickets now. It might be a very fantastic race. Just telling you what I know, and that's all I got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next. Well, in case you haven't heard it, the Southwest Allen County School District is having a bit of a problem involving their bus transportation for the young children that go to those schools in that area. The big problem is they're running out of drivers. And it's not so much they're running out, the drivers are resigning, quitting, whatever it happens to be, and they don't have enough drivers to be able to serve all the routes. Now, according to the Director of Transportation for the school system, they try to notify the parents in the afternoon prior to the school bus not running in their particular area, so the parents can make transportation situation for their kids. Now, in a lot of cases, that's pretty difficult when you think about it, because if mom and dad both work, or they only have one car, and dad takes the car to work, it creates a big problem. Trust me. Anybody that has their kids in private school and knows that they have to take their kids to school every day and pick them up, because private schools, for the most part, do not offer bus transportation to the children that attend. Well, the problem is for these parents, they don't necessarily know, and sometimes the situation is so bad that it doesn't happen till the morning of. That's a pretty drastic situation, but things happen. Now, you're saying to yourself, fine, but they have buses, they have people. Why do they suddenly lose drivers? All right, let me tell you what I think is going on. This is my opinion only. I think some of these drivers who basically, many of them, most of them, are retired folks. Just looking for a little side hustle, a little place to make a few extra bucks in today's society, like many retired people have to do to survive. I know. One of them. And so they're taking an extra job. But that extra job requires them to ride on a bus, drive a bus with a commercial driver's license, and endure the slings and arrows of the children they are driving around. You heard me right. The slings and arrows. When I was a young man, 8th grade if I remember correctly, rode a bus to school, and the kids would get kind of rowdy on our bus. And our bus driver, a lady, she'd pull the bus over, stop the bus, get up, and she would just rip us a new one. Because we deserved it. And then everybody sort of settled down and took it easy and didn't say anything. Yeah, it would come back a few weeks later. We'd be back the same boisterous manner. But today the kids are different. It isn't just talking, it's doing. Sadly, children today do not respect authority from virtually anyone. That includes parents, teachers. Teachers will tell you. Bus drivers are saying, I've had enough of this. I ain't going to do it no more. And they're quitting. And that's a sad state of affairs, but ladies and gentlemen, that's what's going on. Yes, retired people need to get jobs because they need money to survive in today's economy. But there's only so much you can take driving a bus of 40, 50 kids who are rambunctious and have no respect for anything or anyone. And the drivers, frankly, have had enough. That's my observation. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. That's what's happening. You wonder why? Now you know. Somebody's got to set things straight. We'll see what happens. That's all I have for you. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, interestingly enough, I happened to run across an article from the Indiana Star talking about school vouchers. And they talked about a gentleman by the name of Juan Garcia. Wanted his daughter to attend a high school with a strong academic program, but it was a private high school, a Catholic high school. Wanted to put his daughter in one of those Catholic high schools. And he was paying about $10,000 a year in tuition for her to attend a a Catholic high school in Mishawaka, Indiana. Fine, $10,000 a year. There's many people who have paid for their kids to attend private schools, all the while paying their property tax to be able to pay for public schools, even though their kids aren't going to them. That's happened a lot, okay? And those parents had to scrape by, and hey, they want their kid to get the best education, so they send them to private schools. I understand that, all right? I'm one of those. Paid for it. Didn't ask for anybody else, but that's what I want my daughters to be educated, and I stand by that. Well, anyway, one, turns out he was an IT programmer, and school said, hey, you know, they've expanded the voucher program, and you can get a voucher for your daughter to attend. So he checked it out, and sure enough, he could, because the voucher program in the state of Indiana started out low and has gone up dramatically. As a matter of fact, it's gotten as high as $300 and some million. Went from $15.5 million to start to more than $300 million now, because they've expanded the allowability for families to put their kids into private schools. And they said, well, if you had $40,000, family of four, which means somebody was earning $20 an hour, one person, or $10 an hour for two people, they had put their kids in a private school. They'd take them out of what they said were failing. Keep that in mind. So their kids didn't have to go to a failing school. So if you're low income, you don't have to send your kids to a failing school, but if you're a higher income, you're supposed to send your kid to a failing school. Apparently that's the implication here. I don't like it, but that's exactly what they're saying. Well, anyway, so here's the deal. They expanded the allowability, and this will allow people in higher incomes to families earning more than $99,000 a year to send their kids to private schools if they choose to use vouchers. People are complaining about that. Say, oh, you're taking money away from the public schools. They're going to have to cut back on programs. Well, if the public schools are losing students to private schools, shouldn't their cost to operate those schools go down? I'm just saying. Or they're saying, well, no, we got the same number of teachers, and we just they have less students, so okay, we have to pay them more, I guess. We have to pay for the school. Well, don't private schools have to pay their teachers? Don't private schools have to pay for the brick and mortars of their schools? You know, the electric bills, the gas bill, you know, maintenance on the buildings. You think they're free? No, it's just a matter of cost. So are people making decisions here in the state of Indiana to send their kids to private schools, even though the program has now gone from $15 million to over $300 million a year? Yes, they are. Do they have a right to do that? Well, based on the expansion, yes, they do. And for the line of, well, it was only for low-income people to get their kids out of bad schools. Well, if bad schools exist, it doesn't matter whether you're low income or high income. A bad school is a bad school. I don't care what you say. Now, can schools get better? Yes. Are there some schools that are better than others? You betcha. That's why people live in certain districts that they move to, because the schools are so much better in that particular district. Hence, the people want to live there. I understand that. There's some very good public schools in certain locales in certain areas, because that's what they fancy themselves, and everybody wants to live in those areas. All right. All that being said, the program is now over $300 million, but when Mitch Daniels was governor, he said, yeah, I wanted to start, but I had to go slow in the beginning, had to start out small, but is it getting more and more people are leaving? The answer is yes. So why are people migrating from public schools to private schools? Is that telling you something? That something isn't good, something's wrong, and something needs to be fixed? And until you fix that, people are still going to be migrating, unless they found a public school that is so good that that's area that everybody wants to move to. And aren't we seeing that in the state of Indiana? Just saying. That's the point. That's all I got for you right now. See ya.
Coming up next.
Well, allow me to change the topic a little bit, because this time I'm going to be talking about sports, namely America's sport, which apparently is baseball. But I'm going to take you back a number of years, frankly over 20 years. Back in the day when baseball was still played, right next to Memorial Coliseum on Coliseum Boulevard. Yes, the old stadium that used to be there, and the Fort Wayne Wizards, if you remember that. Well, I was one of those people that supported the Wizards probably from day one, had season tickets, sat right there behind the home plate, enjoyed the ball games, took my family, kids, did it for a long time, loved it. Even had a family name in one of those bricks outside the stadium. So we were baseball fans. And when things started to change and they decided that, hey, let's take the stadium downtown, build something new down there, I was on the radio. And I became a detractor, for lack of better terms. And I said some things that, frankly, I now regret. I didn't like the idea of building a stadium downtown. I thought the stadium we had was just dandy, worked really well. It was close to where I lived northeast at the time. And it was easy to get to, easy to park into. Everything was fine. Had the right seats, had everything I liked. Occasionally went up to the suites on occasion, not very often, but enjoyed it for what it was, especially when the fireworks would come, 4th of July, they'd light the fireworks off there over near IPFW, which was IPFW back in those days. But they decided to go downtown and build a facility right downtown Fort Wayne, took a lot of buildings and property out and built the stadium. And then I remember they announced the team would change their name. And I was on WoWo at the time, and I said some things that, to be honest, weren't very complimentary. And I said some things about the new team's name that were made fun of. I am not proud of what I did because ultimately the team became something special. And Parkview downtown, Parkview Field, which they now call it, is a stunning facility. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It is considered one of the top 2 minor league baseball stadiums in the entire United States. That's something to be said for Fort Wayne. And if you've seen the pictures of the stadium downtown, some of the fabulous pictures by John McCauley and his robot thingy that he flies around taking pictures, and he does a great job, by the way. It's stunning, and these pictures are showing up all around the United States, and people say, hey, come to Fort Wayne. Look at downtown. Look at the skyline. Look at the fireworks at Parkview Field. And it has really become a status, a big thing, special thing. Tell you the truth, folks, I have never been to Parkview Field since it was built. Embarrassment, yeah. I just felt ashamed and that I took on the name, took on the team, the stadium, and I said some things that I sorely regret. But I can't bring them back. I can't outlive them. They're there. Things you say and those things last forever. And for me, I just can't muster the courage to go down there and see it and say, man, I was really totally wrong. That's just me. Other people probably better than I am at it. But I just feel bad about what I said, and I just can't live with the embarrassment of saying, that didn't work, and it was probably the best idea that somebody ever thought of. That's me, old school and wrong in many ways. And this time I was massively wrong, and I regret it. But my hat's off to the folks at Parkview, the people who came up with the plan, the people that executed it, the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, yes, Mike Nutter, and all the other folks. They're good people. And I especially like the pictures that John McCauley has done with his drone. That's good stuff, man. Good stuff. So, Fort Wayne, formally, I'm sorry I spoke ill of the entire thing. That's my fault. That's on me. And I'll have to live with that for as long as I live. That's all I've got to tell you. See ya.
Coming up next. Well, what do you say we have a little history lesson? And for those of you that remember a TV show back from the 1960s, at least that's when it started, Rocky Bullwinkle, there was one particular section of the show with Sherman and Peabody, if you remember that. Sherman was the boy and Mr. Peabody was the dog. He was the intelligent one. And a thing called a Wayback Machine. They'd set it to a year and they'd go back. Well, We're going to do that same thing. We're going to set the Wayback Machine back to 1984. That was 40 years ago, folks. And in Fort Wayne, Indiana, things, well, were not quite the way they are today. You see, back then, Fort Wayne was, well, kind of in a pickle. We had some real big problems going on, and one of which was a natural disaster that happened in 1982, the big flood. And I mean the big flood. And it was a bad situation with the flood. But you know what? The town came together, and the biggest thing that came together was the teenagers of this town who saved the city of Fort Wayne. They're the ones who set up the sandbags on the dikes and kept everything going so the whole city didn't flood. And yes, there was flooding that happened in a lot of areas, and it was pretty drastic. But a lot of the city was saved by the actions of teenagers. And folks, adults, we would go over to the Coliseum and fill sandbags during our lunch hours, things of that ilk. That's what we did. And kids would take them. They would work day and night and save the city. But there was something else going on. And that was a problem with the, International Harvester. This goes back to 1979 and something that happened that caused a big problem. See, in the late 70s, things were not going well with Harvester. They had a CEO. His name was Archie McCardle, probably the most hated man in the city of Fort Wayne. But back in November 1st, 1979, the board of directors of Harvester gave Archie McCardle a $1.8 million bonus. The very next day, the UAW went on strike, and it was a long strike, and it was an ugly strike. Fort Wayne had been making Harvester products for many years. You think about the Scout, the venerable little, Scout that sort of looked like the SUVs or the vehicles that we have today. And one of the other things was what called the Travelall. I hadn't remembered much about that, but it was sort of like the Chevy Suburban. Those are some of the things that Fort Wayne made. International Harvester was a big company, but they were losing money. Things weren't going well. And then the strike happened. And, they started losing even more money. Well, ultimately, Archie McCardle was gone, and they brought in another gentleman by the name of Louis Menck, M-E-N-K. I may be mispronouncing it, but that was his name, back in 1982. And he used to be the head of the Burlington Northern Railroad, and he did a lot of cost cutting. And I mean, he did a bunch of cost cutting. And that cost cutting even came down to, cutting back plants. And one of the plants they had to think about closing was Fort Wayne. There was two plants that they had to choose from. One was in Springfield, Ohio. The other was in Fort Wayne. And the mayor at the time was Winfield Moses. Win Moses was the mayor from 1980 to 1987. And he and all the other people in the city did everything they could to try to save the plant here at Fort Wayne. But ultimately, the Springfield plant was a lot newer. And the Fort Wayne plant was pretty old, let's be honest. And ultimately, they announced the closure of the Fort Wayne plant. All of this happened early 1980s. Now, you got to remember, the inflation had gone through the roof. You saw 20% interest rates on mortgages. And after Harvester closed, the unemployment rate in Fort Wayne went up to 14%. Now, imagine trying to buy a house in Fort Wayne when the interest rates were 20%. Ronald Reagan was elected president, and people felt things were starting to change when Reagan got in. And gradually they were. But what was going to happen? Well, weird things were going on. Something was going on. Fort Wayne had lost, 10,000 workers from Harvester from its big age? 10,000 workers. That's a big hit. It's not just Harvester. It's all the other plants that worked with Harvester. The Danas, the axle plants, all the things they did. Then you had the piston plants. Everything was there. And that whole section of the town on the east side of Fort Wayne was starting to go downhill. A lot of folks don't realize that back in that same time phrase, there was a refinery in Fort Wayne, Gladio Refinery, that actually took oil and made jet fuel and aviation fuel and gas. That's right here in Fort Wayne. We had a refinery. The biggest thing they did was making Jet A for Grissom Air Force Base for the tankers that were fueling all the other airplanes in the sky, the KC-135s. that was going on. And that was all happening, but things started to wane. And when Harvester left, things started to die pretty quickly. And then something afoot. And that big thing afoot was somebody was starting to buy up properties in the southwest part of Allen County. And ultimately, the folks over at General Motors came in and announced 40 years ago that they were going to build a plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were shutting down a plant that existed over in Janesville, Wisconsin. Well, here's the problem. For a lot of Fort Wayne folks, they're going, whoa, man, with jobs. No. The union had a right to bring their employees from Janesville down to Fort Wayne, and a lot of them did. Many folks came down. Some commuted. Commuting from Janesville to Fort Wayne? Yeah, they did. But 3,000 employees. GM built a $500 million plant. And yes, there were some Fort Wayne hires, but once they built that plant in the southwest side, they started adding on to it. They were building the Chevy trucks. And they built a lot of trucks. Built some great trucks. And things started to happen in Fort Wayne, come alive a little bit. Now, why did GM decide to build a plant in Fort Wayne? That's a good question. Well, it turns out a gentleman by the name of Roger Smith, he was the CEO of General Motors at the time, and he was watching the flood on TV. Everybody was watching the flood. We were national news. And he was so astounded with the fact that teenagers, kids, were stacking the dike and they were putting the sandbags down. They were saving the city. He said, you know what? He said a city that could handle that kind of distress, that kind of terrible thing that went on with kids and parents working together. He said, you know what? We could build a plant in that city, and that plant will survive. So yes, that's why they built it. Now, the plant was about $500 million. Started out with 3,000 employees, many of whom came down from Janesville. That's why, by the way, we have a whole lot of Packer fans that exist now in Fort Wayne. But that was 40 years ago, friends. 40 years ago, and that plant ultimately opened up in 1986. Turns out to be the third largest employer here in Allen County, about 4,300 employees. Parkview is huge, obviously. And right now, they're building a $2 billion Google plant on the southeast side of Fort Wayne. Not going to have as many employees because, it's just a big giant computer, if you will. But that's what happened. That's how Fort Wayne survived a flood, the closure of Harvester, which was a big hit, 14% unemployment, and General Motors said, hey, we're going to open a plant in Fort Wayne. 40 years ago, friends, you have now been on the Wayback Machine, and you understand what happened, how it happened, and why? Well, where we are today. There's more to talk about, but that's what I'm telling you about right now. Thanks for going to the Wayback Machine. Hey, Rocky and Bullwinkle, one of my favorite shows. That's all I got for you. See ya. Coming up next.
All right, I want to talk to you folks about something that inevitably happens to each and every one of us. We will pass. We will be gone. Our ashes will become ashes, dust to dust, as they say. Well, I just received a call from a very, very dear friend that her mother had just passed. Now, it didn't come as a surprise because, unfortunately, her mother had been suffering the dread of Alzheimer's, dementia, if you will, for a number of years. And she'd been the sole provider. She'd taken care of everything for her mom. And unfortunately, that her dad had passed away a few years prior to that, so it was a one-on-one situation, and she had to do it all by herself. She had to be there every day for her mom, regardless as she gradually went downhill. She was always there. Now, the reason I tell you all this, because eventually, one way, shape, or form, it'll happen to each and every one of us. If you're responsible for taking care of someone in your family, doesn't matter whether it's your mom, your dad, brother, sister, whatever, be prepared. This friend of mine, she was prepared. She did all the stuff she had to get done legally, made sure everything was safe and sound. and she had to do what she had to do. But the one thing she wanted to do was to make sure that she was always with her mom to the very end. And she was. Doesn't happen to everybody, but in her case, she did what she felt was right. And I respect that, and I totally honor that. I'm just telling you, it does happen to all of us. Maybe not dementia, maybe something else. But be prepared, because life will go on eventually for you too. And it's how you look at life down the road that'll determine how well you adapt. Just something I wanted to pass along to you. Not a good day, not the best I've seen, but I just want to tell you what happened. Hopefully, you're able to deal with it as well as my friend did. She's a star, and she has my admiration. And that's all I've got to say about that.
Well, that does it for today's edition of the Pat White Show. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to follow us on social media for the latest Pat White Show for all the news and updates. And stay tuned for brand new episodes of the Pat White Show coming real soon. Like what you're hearing? Make sure you don't miss an episode by following the Pat White Show on Spotify. Just search for the Pat White Show, hit follow, and get ready for insightful conversations delivered straight to your Spotify feed. If you enjoy watching podcasts as much as listening to them, good news! The Pat White Show is also on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel now for visual content, behind-the-scenes footage, and full podcast experience. Find us on YouTube at the Pat White Show channel.